Wondering what the F has happened to your body and your life? You're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to Season 3 of Transforming 45, where we dive into the incredible stories of how brilliant humans are navigating the midlife squeeze with courage, passion, and a healthy dose of humor. Don't miss out on any of our heart-led episodes. Hit the subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and if you're inspired, share an episode you love with a friend. It means more to me than I can express that you're choosing to spend time here and sharing our message of midlife revolution. So let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. It's been a long time since I have done a full solo episode. I do my one words in January, and I think that's the extent of the solo episodes I've been doing over the last 2 seasons. But I realized that this episode would be airing on my birthday. May 8th is a Thursday this week. And I have lots of amazing conversations to share with all of you that I can't wait to send out. And I felt like this was the perfect opportunity for some reflection. As you know, the title of the show is Transforming 45, and this year I'm turning 48. So it has been 2.5 years since I recorded my first episode, and I thought the timing of this coming out on my actual birthday was meaningful, and that it was time to do some reflection on what has transpired over the last 2.5 years. And as I sat down to record this episode, I opened my computer and it was 11:11. And that felt like a direct message that it was time to revisit that story I told on that first episode and share updates. For those of you who listen along with regularly with episodes, you will know how my story has changed and evolved as I share snippets of it in conversations I have with the brilliant guests who generously share their gifts and their wisdom. And there also is something about focusing entirely on this story and how my story is evolving, because that first episode was called My Story So Far. And I feel like 2.5 years is a good time to make some updates in continuing that story. So I started today by listening to that first episode. I will tell you, that was an emotional experience for many reasons. One of them being the woman who recorded that 45-year-old woman in November of 2022 had no idea really what was coming. And the word that kept coming up to me as I listened was numb. And I believe it is something I have shared here before. And it was just so clear to me. In that first episode, I tell my story of leaving education, of losing my mom, of what it's like to have children who are in their late teens. They were both still in high school at the time. And in service of telling a really good story, I wrapped all of that up by the end of the episode with a beautiful bow. And there was one moment where my voice was a little shaky, where there were tears, but I was talking about these big traumas in my life without any emotion. I was just telling a story. And in the extreme upheaval that was my roller coaster ride of 2024, I realized that was my main go-to coping strategy, and that was to feel numb. And so actually feeling nothing. And I remember getting ready to record that episode, and I started off by saying, I'm excited and I'm nervous, which was true, but I didn't really feel it. And I have to tell you, in sitting down to record this episode, I felt very differently. I felt this big ball of like I might throw up. And that is my body's way of saying you are beginning to reconnect to this body, to body. We are at the beginning stages of doing that. I don't judge my 2022 self for being numb. I don't judge my 2023 or 2024 or early 2025 self of being numb. Actually, I have really been numb since 2007. when my mom passed away, and a whole host of other things happened during that time. And it was what I needed. It's important that when we look back and we reflect, we do so with a sense of empathy and grace for the person who was going through that time of life. In 2007, I had two very small humans. I had a mother who had just passed away. And the part of the story I didn't tell at that point was the story of what happened to the relationship with my dad. And I didn't tell that part because he was alive, and the people pleaser in me didn't want to tell a story that could be seen as harmful to anyone else. And it also was a really big part of what happened in that time. I also think that the numbness kept me from that part of the story. So before I get into that, and I will, because it is something that needs to be told at this point to really understand the level of numb that I have been experiencing, I want to tell the story of what happened after that first episode. There have been so many incredible experiences and humans that I have gotten the privilege of talking to. People will ask me, what's hard about podcasting? And really nothing is hard about podcasting for me. It is a gift. This show has been an absolute gift in my life. And the thing that's hard, if I'm being real, is that I want people to hear these stories. I want people to be touched and moved and influenced by what they hear in this show, and growing an audience is fucking slow. So that is the hard part. But all of the creation is just really beautiful. It also is a gift to be able to go back and hear my reflections from 2.5 years ago, to really make the connections to what was happening then and how I took the next step forward in this continuing story. So the podcast has been a gift on many levels. On the humans I've gotten to meet, the stories I have gotten to tell, the community that we are building, and on my personal level of being able to reflect on just how much has really changed. I could hear it in my voice. I sounded younger. And I think part of that was the level of numb that I was experiencing. You could hear it in my voice. And I respect that version of me for being in that survival mode and doing what she needed to do at that time. Over the course of 2.5 years, a lot of life has happened for all of us. And that woman in November of 2022 was only a few months into a leave from teaching. I spend a lot of time talking about my teaching story in that time. And what's interesting is I was co-facilitating a session with a colleague this week, and she was asking me about, a structure that happens at school boards at this time of year. And I said, I didn't even think about it. In that year that I was on a leave and the year after that, I was really still quite attached to that world and the calendar and even my days. I would still get up at the same time I got up at as an educator, do my morning routine, sit down at my desk by 9 a.m., work until noon, have a little lunch break, come back, work until 4 o'clock. And it took really until the fall of this year, which was the great unraveling, to shake me out of all of those routines and all of that programmed, time-based structure. And so I'm grateful for the fall of 2024 and for many things. It was exceptionally challenging. And it was also some freedom. When my colleague and I had that conversation, it made me realize how much I've been able to let go that I wasn't sure I would be able to. And that felt really good and really exciting. And going back and listening, I realized, gosh, that 2022 version was still in this desperate need to keep everything the same. Despite the fact that I was wanting to make a big change in my life by shifting careers, I needed to make everything as similar and safe as possible for everyone else in my life. I didn't want my kids to feel disrupted. I didn't want my partner, I didn't want Ken to feel disrupted. I didn't want for any other major changes to have to happen in our lives just because I made this change for myself. And that was naive. And it was not at all what I really wanted. I just hadn't gone through all of the layers of evolution yet. And so I lived that first year of leave constantly asking the question of, do I go back to teaching or do I continue down this road? And it was a question I grappled with every day on a regular loop. And people will say to me, "You're so courageous for making this change." And I always feel a little level of guilt and shame when people say that to me. And that is something I continue to work on because of how much I struggled and how afraid I was. And I certainly did not feel courageous. And every time I considered going back, there was a little nudge from the universe until the final door slam happened. And it was sort of mid-May, right as I was having to make this decision. The universe has an excellent sense of humor. And I was going back and forth about what do I do? I did not want to go back. My body, there was not a single element in my body that wanted to go back, but our financial reality was always what was at the bottom of that. Like, we will lose our financial stability if I make this decision. And that was what was grounding all of my fear. And that was why I kept going back and forth. So right as the deadline is approaching for me to have to make this decision, I open up my work email, my business email, and there is an email there from someone I don't know who says, "I just think you should know that educators at the school that I work at are openly talking in the staff room about how you had an affair with," insert the name of the person, which I won't do here. "I just thought you should know, and I want to know if it's true." I can have a good sense of humor about it now and the absurdity of it, but in the moment, it felt like a punch in the gut. It felt like opening up, in movies when you see a ransom letter where people have cut out the letters and glued them onto a piece of paper because of the anonymity of it, and in not knowing this person, I was knocked on my heels of, how is this possible? How is this happening? What is this all about? What I know now is that was the final slam of the door from the universe saying, "Lisa, this place is not for you." It had been giving me those subtle messages my entire life. And this was the 2x4 of, you are not going back there. It was that reflection of the toxicity of what always was damaging, of all the reasons why I had to hide myself, of all the reasons why I would put on armor every day to go into work, to be able to be in that kind of space. And again, there are brilliant educators out there and people and humans who I love, and duality is real. And we move back and forth between these spaces. And that moment reminded me of why I needed to be free. The first person I texted about it was Ken, and I always appreciate his responses. He laughs. He's like, "Oh Lord," which just touches my heart so much because he is so secure in how much we love each other and trust each other that his only response is like, "Well, that's ridiculous." And it was funny because he actually was away. He was out of town. And so this had happened in the morning and I texted him about it. And later on that day, he texted and was like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I've been better." And his response was, "Why? What's the matter?" I was like, "Well, remember that text this morning?" And he was like, "Oh, Lisa, that was hours ago." I admire how men are able to compartmentalize and move through emotion in that way, where is it that email and the emotion that it brought up in me was weaving its way, like the story was working its way into all of these thoughts that I had constantly. And of course, I reached out to my community of incredible women who supported me and gave me the space to process what I needed to process. And within a few days, I was able to see that as the closing door. And I am now grateful for the experience because it was the final, no, absolutely not. You are not going back there. And so a week later, I put in my resignation and the decision was made. One of the things I noticed in my first episode is that I would make a statement like that, and it would be the end, like the period of that sentence, and we are moving on. What I know now is that life is a run-on sentence. There are very few periods that end things where we just move on and never revisit. Because in the years that followed, although I was always grateful and I don't regret my decision, there have been so many moments of self-doubt, so many moments of what did I do? Because building a business took so much longer than I anticipated it would. Building a community was so much harder than I thought it would be. I just thought we're here talking about issues that people don't talk about, and that's going to draw people in, and this is going to grow really quickly. And that's not the truth. It continues to take time to build this sort of space and this community and this business. And that ultimately led to significant changes in our lives that have been painful. In the ensuing time, we had 2 children who were heading off to university. And that's why 2024 really became this explosion. If you listen to One Word 2025, you'll hear me tell the story of how Ken's word for 2024 was explosion, and he manifested the shit out of that word. And our children heading off to university was the catalyst for that, because as an educator, I had a very consistent and stable income, and that is currently and has not been my reality since then. And with 2 children heading to university at the same time, with all of those expenses, we were forced to make some big changes. We had to sell our cottage property. It took a long time for that to sell, which we weren't anticipating. So we ended up putting our house on the market, and we anticipated staying in our community. And as we were walking down this road of selling things and making changes, this was another space where I started to realize that the numbness was beginning to thaw. And I was beginning to process all of the trauma I had been experiencing. One of the many things, aside from finances, that has been challenging about this is all of the people that I've lost along the way, friendships who I thought would be there and would be supportive, just faded and are in the past now. I also have been beautifully surprised by friendships who did come with me, who I wouldn't have anticipated, and the beautiful humans who I have reconnected from my past, and the new humans who are now part of my world who I had no idea existed in November of 2022. And I'm grateful for all of those shifts and changes in relationships. And it was really painful, and there was a lot of grief. And so as I would drive around my former community of Barrie, I found myself holding so much rage. I'd remember things that happened at various locations, and it would make me sad that those relationships were no longer present in my world, or it would make me angry. And to tell you the truth, every time I would drive past a school, because there wasn't a school in Simcoe County that I didn't have a connection to, every time I would pass by a school and I would see their signs and the quotations that schools put up on those signs, the only thing that would come across my mind was, fuck you, and fuck your quotes, and fuck all the way off. And I knew I couldn't continue to live that way, because it was not giving me the space that I needed to heal. That rage, although it was a feeling, it still was a protective feeling that was keeping me from getting into what I really was feeling. And so I knew that I needed to change locations. And I let myself dream and imagine, and where had I always wanted to live? And when I listened back to my first episode, I spent a lot of time talking about my 16-year-old self and reconnecting to her and her passion and joy and excitement about this world, and the place that she always wanted to live was where we live now. And I got the courage to talk to Ken and say, I think I want to move, like really move. And in his very predictable way, he listened and had his moment of like, yeah, I think we should too. And then he had a panic moment of, are we crazy? And then we ended up moving forward. And while all of this big change was happening, all the real estate, my kids getting ready to head off to university, my dad was not doing well. My dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2013. And so had been living with it for quite some time. And he had had deep brain stimulation in 2018, which was a significant support of his mental health and well-being and quality of life. And it was evident that the effectiveness of that device was beginning to wear off, and the full level of what his Parkinson's was becoming obvious on a daily basis. I said earlier I was going to tell the story of my dad because I haven't, and it's important to tell in knowing how complicated this time was for me. In many ways, growing up, it was my mom and I. In that first episode, I talked about my dad being an educator and how it totally took over his life. And it's why I didn't want to be an educator. And some of the result of that was that he wasn't around a lot. He was busy and he was involved in 1,000 school-based things. And so it was my mom and I. And I often felt like my dad was just kind of along for the ride. And I remember when my mom was dying, one of the things I thought that was an absolute panic for me was, what am I going to do with this guy when she's not here? And that's not easy to say out loud. And it also is true. And then 6 weeks after my mom died, he had moved in with another woman who had significant mental health issues, and she really hated me. And that was a lot to process at the time of losing my mom, having 2 small humans, and going back to work and building a new reality without my mom in it. And then that was complicated by this person who came in at a very tender, grief-filled time and required a ton of energy to manage. And for a while, I rode that roller coaster trying to be supportive of my dad. They were married within a year, and it was not smooth. And it was not at all easy. And the time came where I had to make a choice to save my own sanity. And so there were years where I did not have any relationship with my dad at all. We communicated via text when it was necessary, but I did not see him for holidays. We did not speak on the phone. We were disconnected. And then one day in 2017, I came home from work and he was stretched out on my couch and he said, I think I'm going to have to stay here for a while, because she had kicked him out and they were getting divorced. And that was complicated for me. Being the person who always wants to be there for people and be supportive, I took all of my own feelings and all of the really hard experiences I had had during that time, put them aside and said, okay, you can stay here. We'll support you. We will help you. And by the end of 3 months of him living with us, I was in a constant state of panic attack, which again is where the numbness had to come in. Because even with that state of feeling like I was constantly in like heart palpitations, heart racing, like all of the things, had I not had a level of numbness, I don't think I would have been able to function every day, because of all of the built up emotion that was in my body that I could not deal with at the time. And so that history is important in the walking of my dad to the end of his life, because it was complicated. Being that support person and holding all this pain and hurt and grief was really, really hard. And being there with him on his last day, we tried to make it as celebratory as we could, of look at the life that you had created. And when I asked him what was the best thing about life, he looked at me and he said, it was you. And it was heartbreaking because I didn't feel the same way at all. And saying goodbye to him was a relief, one, for him to be released of a body that was not working for him and that was causing him pain and discomfort and sorrow. I felt great empathy for him for the sorrow he was experiencing at the end of his life. And being free of that responsibility in that relationship has allowed me to finally start to heal. And so his death was the beginning of the warming. Not that that happened right away. it still took months because, wrapped up in all of this was both of my kids leaving. He passed away, packed up a house we had lived in for 18 years, moved to a new city. Ken started a new job. It was quite literally an explosion of everything that we had created and a recreation, a new iteration in a new place. I recently had dinner with a very longtime friend who we hadn't seen each other in almost 17 years. And she said, it was so amazing watching you do that because it was so unlike you. It's the power of having people in your life who have known you for a long time. And it also gave me something to really sit and think about. The human that she knew through my, preteen, teen, up until now, that was unlike me. But when I think back to the human I was before I was told that safety, security, and being good was what was valued more than anything else, I think that girl, that imp who initially entered this planet, it's very much like her. She was curious and adventurous and full of spark and not afraid. Not afraid of change, not afraid of living as herself. I have this picture that I pulled out of an old album, and it's from the going away party from when we were leaving Hanover, which was the town I initially lived in, to when we were moving to Meaford. And it's this row of 7-year-old girls, and we're all in dress-up clothes. And I'm in this very glamorous 1970s outfit that my mom had made, and it was way too big for me. But I still remember what the fabric felt like. I used to love wearing it so much. And the wind was blowing back my hair, and my face was in the wind, and I was in like a real model pose. And I just thought, yeah, that's her. It was there, and she was embodied, and she was brave, and she was nervous about moving. She didn't want to leave her friends behind, but she also knew that it was going to be okay. And so all of these big life changes have ultimately been an incredible gift. It was all really fucking hard too. I didn't anticipate the levels of grief I would experience that really broke down all of the walls I had built in all of these pieces of identity that I had created. And in letting all of those walls fall, there was this squishy, gushy, raw, beating heart that requires a ton of healing. And that work is beginning. I'm grateful to all of the guests and humans who have come on the show and told their stories. I have felt myself reflected in. I felt so seen and heard in all of those conversations because so many of us have these incredibly powerful experiences. The journey forward as the story continues, the thing I appreciate more than anything is that plot structure that we are taught of start off slow, the plot increases, it reaches a plot point, and then it comes back down again and evens it. Just continues to happen. There isn't a bow that is tied up on the end of that plot line or that story. They continue to weave their way into new insights of our past experiences and new places to look from our current reality if we allow ourselves to be here and present. And it allows us to look forward in different ways, knowing that we are constantly on this plot structure that moves its way up and down, and that's okay. That's life. It's how it is. And what matters in all of that is the healing we're able to do, the thawing of the numbness, of letting ourselves be present to who we are right now in this moment, to connect with other people who we can find love and care and community. Because the other piece of all of this is like, that is what's happening in my own personal world. And the world around us has exploded too. It has shifted and changed in so many ways that my brain can't really comprehend. I was reflecting a lot in my first episode about all the sexism that I experienced. And as I look at what's happening in the world now, this being in this space of real lack of empathy and this push for a very patriarchal and colonial structure of what maleness is, what it is to be a man. And I am surprised by it over and over and over again. And as I think back on why, it's because as I was growing up, I was surrounded by men and boys and young men who were really kind and loving. My grandfathers were playful and funny, and I knew how much they loved me. My friends who were male through high school were also creative and caring and thoughtful. I mean, it's not that every experience I had was amazing. I've told the story of my high school boyfriend. That one was not so good. And there also was another boy during that time who was my absolute nemesis. And I see and I actually he and I were in an English class together in my OAC year of high school, and I had to transfer out of it because I could not stand listening to him talk. And I'm seeing the pattern of that repeat of I do get to a point where I realize my peace is more valuable than staying in a place that I can't stand. And I'm seeing that repeat in, leaving education, and I'm seeing it repeat again now in the global context that we are in that is very painful. And I wonder how many of us are living in this very numb place because all of this shift and change feels so painful and scary. And maybe we don't have the tools to really understand what's happening or to express how we feel about it. I am grateful for all of the men and young men who showed up in my life in such a beautiful, heart-forward way. How privileged a place to be able to come from, to have that assumption. And so I talked about this in the first episode a little bit when I experienced that first wave of sexism of like, oh, this is not what I expected. This is not the internal schema that I have. I didn't know what to do with it. And it was part of the beginning of that numbness, of this self-protection. And so knowing all of this in this time that we are in my own personal life context, what I know now that maybe I didn't know as deeply in 2022 is that life is just messy. And try as we might to tell a really good story, which we still can do, we need to make more room for the messy. We need to make more room for all of the emotions. We need to make more room for all of the thawing, to let ourselves really feel and see each other. I feel like we are living in this time where we don't truly see and hear each other for the humans that we are, that we're too afraid to feel and to connect and to disagree. We can talk about that for why the reasons for that are for hours, but they are. And so as I move forward into how this story continues next, I know it will be unpredictable. I know I really have no idea what is coming next. In 2022, I think I did. I think I thought, I'm going to put these plans in place and I'm going to make these things happen. And this is how the story is going to go. And I no longer think that at all. I think I am going to let myself be open to the wonderful surprise that this life is, to all of the pain and the grief and the challenge that comes along with it. But in feeling all of that, I also am more capable of feeling joy and of feeling deeper gratitude and of feeling really connected to the humans around me. And so that's how this story will continue, with unpredictability and grief and joy and pain and sorrow and all of the truth of what it is to be human. And I hope I can continue to tell those stories in ways that make this community feel seen and heard and real, and build this narrative of what it is to be a menopausal woman in this time, and how we choose to heal, which is also always a continuing journey. It is not a destination. How we are healing, how we are growing, how we are evolving, and how we are showing up and showing how beautiful it is to be in this incredibly transformative phase of life. So, to the journey ahead, to all of you, thank you for being part of the Transforming 45 community. Who knows? We'll see where we go next. But I do know that it will be together in community and sharing our stories.
Electricast.
Hey everyone. Thanks for joining me on this week's episode of Transforming 45. I hope you feel inspired, empowered, and ready to embrace every facet of your midlife journey. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. These actions make a world of difference in growing our podcast community. Your support helps us reach much more amazing listeners just like you. And don't forget, please share an episode you love with a friend or with your community. Sharing our stories is what helps our community grow. Keep shining your midlife magic, and I'll catch you next week.